sorry to all the folks that already did this, and moving ahead, what else is going to come to the table that, you know, think that they can just work around form-based code because we'll allow it? I think that's the question. Now, if we don't want form-based code, I think that's the bigger conversation.
I also find it troubling that we have a planning commission that's ignoring what the policy is, and basically it's speaking out against the form-based code when that's an adopted policy with regards to our comprehensive plan. And I find that troubling, that if this is an issue, one of the responsibilities of the planning commission is to have an annual review of the comprehensive plan and come back with recommendations. And this has not been done. I know that we're going through a comprehensive plan, you know, coming up, and this can be looked at, but I really am having a problem with the fact that we set a goal for the city of what we want to do, and we establish designs that are expensive in our approach to ameliorate what we have, create some long-standing buildings and good pedestrian walkways and so forth, and then we just ignore it when it comes up to an individual project. I am going to disagree with you on this. I think that they came forward with this big design that said it was a Taj Mahal, and only to come back with, oh, we're making a minor adjustment to our project, when they drop out everything else, and we have a wash tunnel and a facade.
The cost analysis
Well,
on the
that's
two-story
exactly
should have been done at the very beginning.
Right.
That's why we've been sitting on this for a year, waiting for them to not know they can't afford that extra story. I mean, the cost-benefit analysis should have been done right when the thing was proposed.
I mean, their expense, basically, they have not had the expense of removing the tanks. That was on block, right? And so the expense that they've had is the design, I guess, and the studies that led to this. But in terms of investment beyond that, they haven't really done much.
Well, purchase of the property.
The purchase of the property, but that was going to happen anyway. So, I mean, yeah.
Well, not by them necessarily.
Well, yeah. Well, I think we've talked about wanting more of our developers, and if we want them to be doing that due diligence and planning on the front end, you know, it's, I at least understood. I mean, I voted for the previous policy when it seemed like they were at least trying to make efforts, you know, to fit a square peg into a round hole. But, you know, now that they aren't making that effort, I think it's a harder sell, because, like I said, if they'd done their work up front, they would have known the restrictions on the property. So saying the form-based code is hard doesn't really mean a lot to me if it is our policy on the books.
I mean, I agree with both sides. I feel like, you know, they tried to stretch to make it fit in the form-based policy, and too late figured out that they couldn't afford it, and I feel bad for them, but I also think about the people across the street who, you know, have also.
Now, in fairness, the people across the street,
And an incentive.
not only do they have an incentive, we amended the form-based code in order. We have not done a pure form-based code project since the form-based code's implementation.
Exactly.
So whether it was Cornerstone Commons or Mission Crossing, there have been, and the Cornerstone Commons project actually required a formal amendment to the form-based code. So
what was the deviation on that one?
I can go look that one up.
Well,
I think it had to do with.
Form-based code required a community square on a portion of that property. I think there's actually an underground parking component, if I remember correctly. So
Yeah, that's right. There was a square that kind of Johnson Drive split and went around that green space, and we made some modifications to the requirement there. And on the Mission Crossing project, although it didn't require a specific amendment to the form-based code, that the developer was given a certain period of time within which to construct the residential component of that project. So they built the restaurants and the strip center essentially first, and then the penalty, if you will, for not putting that residential development in would have been a clawback of the incentives on that project, as opposed to a a development restriction of some other type, right? And I understand the point, and I think we understand and appreciate kind of the frustration as well, but I just want to be clear that we have made, we've adjusted and accommodated every project that has come into that West Gateway area trying
So
to
this would be making a
adapt to
precedent.
that. So I think to that point, I don't know that it really sets a precedent. The other thing that I think, as we think about the two-story piece, and particularly the second story on Cornerstone Commons, that density issue is really also encouraging a mixed use. And so this project, you weren't going to, it's not mixed use, and it wasn't with a two-story structure. It was still going to be one, basically a single use by the same company. And so that density, I think, becomes more easier. That's not the right thing to say. Easier. More easier when you're looking at a multi-tenant development. And if you think about the second story, it just, when did that project was constructed 4 years
It's been leased
ago.
for 2 months.
And it's just was leased this last year, and so
So
what
the last
is,
6 months.
what
But
is
there
that?
was a use for this second floor, right?
Well,
By this,
Potentially.
by
they
this,
proposed
by that,
it.
right.
and that's part of the challenge, the Cordova restaurant across the street, it's now vacant. I had a conversation a few months ago with a gentleman that's doing some site evaluations for a national bank that wants to put some locations in the Midwest, including Kansas City, and they're looking at the city of Mission, and they were looking at that site. And the question was, well, can we reuse the restaurant as a bank? Yes, you can make some modifications and reuse the restaurant as a bank. Can we tear down the restaurant and build something new? Yes, you can, according to the form-based code. And I explained all this to him, and well, we're a bank. We don't want to be a landlord leasing out a second floor to a potential tenant. That's just not the business we're in. So that was a conversation I had 3 months ago, and I haven't talked to him since.
Besides that, I've heard we've had at least one restaurant that wanted to come in. Restaurants don't particularly like to go 2 stories either. But it wasn't a fast food restaurant. It would have been a really nice restaurant. We lost that because of form-based code. And there's been others as well. I just don't want Mission to be restrictive to businesses. And I think that's what form-based code ends up being. I understand what you're saying. You want things to look good, you want it to look nice. I'm okay with a car wash looking like a car wash.
We have 2 of them already.
That's free market. Why am I gonna
I
say
know, it is. It's
you can
true.
only have 3
No, it's true.
Mexican restaurants
So,
in Mission?
if there are any other comments at this point, Marcy?
Free market.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said, but with this, especially this triggering us to have that bigger conversation around the form-based component, for this situation, I would be okay with not having that Valero station in the city area and letting them move forward.
For another 3 years.
For another, yeah. So I don't want to force them into a situation that they can't afford or anything like that, but we should have that bigger discussion.
It's my understanding then that this goes to the council
Correct.
and the options are denied or approved.
Correct.
Or
And
is there a
Remand,
remand
I think there's a
option?
remand option,
You can remand back if you have something specific you
but
want.
you want something specific for them to
Yeah, for planning commission
reconsider.
to address.
Like if we want them to consider the form-based code rather than just not like it as a policy option, that would be one potential.
Have they already
Is the
done
re-
I think they've already kind of done.
But the remand,
Possibly.
is for the planning commission or is it for the developer?
It's for the planning commission. You remand it back to the
The
planning
planning
commission.
commission rejecting their decision,
Yeah, with something, you either reject it outright
right?
or remand it back to them with direction to consider something further.
Okay.
So you
And
would
if
need 6 of the 9 votes to
Deny.
To deny.
But not to remand.
You need a simple majority to remand, and then when it comes back to you after a remand, it takes a simple majority to approve. So the supermajority is
It's only
just
for the first
for the
time
first
around.
time it comes to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, they own the property now, so
Correct.
it looks horrendous. It makes Johnson Drive and the city of Mission look terrible. I mean, I'm sick to death of looking at it going by.
Well, they could start taking.
Well, they, absolutely. Seems like they were doing something with the roof. Wasn't there asbestos or
all
something with
that.
the roof?
They took the
Shingles.
shingles
Yeah.
off.
Yeah,
I'm
but-
sure they're not gonna put another pin in it until this.
You gotta know that from a
But we
city
as a city can do
standpoint,
something.
that if they're leaving it like that makes me worried as an owner of a new property that could stand to have their name on it and leave that building looking like it does right now. That's a concern for the future for me.
And, yeah, and related to that, what I don't love, and tying to what RC said, but kind of going the other direction, is I don't like that we might just throw our hands up and say, well, we don't like the empty, decaying site there, so let's just give them this, even if we think it doesn't fit with our existing policies on the book. You know, I get that it's a tough situation, and for people who have to look at it every day, that's obviously not great, but you hate to say, well, you know, developer, you're gonna get what you want just because we hate what's there.
I mean, I still like the design though. I mean, I still like the,
Fair.
it's not that I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but
All right. Are we okay? We've had sufficient questions answered?
Let me tell you this, because the Councilmember Crane asked me to reach out to the developer and just express some of those same concerns, which I did. And again, this would be tentative on the council's approval, but they have put in a request to have the utilities disconnected, and pending the approval on the 17th, they've asked for their demo crew to be on standby to mobilize on the 18th. So,
see there?
Did they tell you that's contingent upon us voting for this?
no, it
Yes,
is, it's pending,
yes.
it absolutely
Yeah,
is
they're not gonna put
contingent
money
upon
in it
that,
if
and I
they
think,
can't.
and
They
I've
own
talked,
it, Pat.
well, but I think, and I've talked to,
So what?
you know, I think we
They'll
have to
sell
look
it.
at, if you make the decision not to approve this, then we have to look at what options we have in terms of property maintenance and code enforcement.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. Our first action item is the acceptance of the June 5th, 2019 Community Development Committee minutes. Are there any corrections or amendments? Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and accept the minutes.
I thought there was a she instead of a he in one place, but that might have been in the other set. So never mind.
Just email me.
Well.
Okay, we'll accept the minutes as they were presented, or as corrected if you find it. The next item is contract award for the sinkhole repairs. Brent?
Yes, thank you. We're talking about the task order the council authorized in April for 2 sinkholes that appeared this spring. One was at 5501 Foxridge Drive, and the other one was at 5939 Woodson. Both these sinkholes came from failed CMP pipe or corrugated metal pipe. One is just a collapsed pipe which needs to be replaced. The other one, the pipe collapsed underneath the storm box, and the storm box is actually collapsed now too, and the sinkholes are getting bigger every day with the rains we keep getting. We've tried to expedite this process as quick as possible so we can get these properties back up and sinkholes fixed so they're a little safer for the community. And we got bids, received bids on Monday. 2 contractors showed up to open bids. SDI was the lowest qualified bidder at $73,307. Looking for the approval for this contract so we can move this forward and get these sinkholes addressed as soon as possible.
Any questions for Brent? Welcome, Nick.
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, we're just
And thank you, as you know, we wouldn't typically send you a packet last Friday with blank, but we didn't want to wait another month on these to move forward.
I mean, they just keep getting bigger every time it rains, so we're just trying to speed up the process as quick as we can to get that stuff addressed, so I appreciate it.
And we had allocated $150,000 in the CIP for that, so we've come in well under the budget, which was,
Do you have a recommendation?
We were due for one of those.
Council
Take
consent.
council consent? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Brent.
Appreciate that.
We have another one now, it's the 50th in Dearborn storm sewer repairs.
Yeah, we've talked about all these a few times, so it helps. So in January, the same thing, the council approved a task order with GBA for Sinkhole at Rhodes on 50th and Dearborn. Same issue, collapsed CMP pipe. As we investigated the site, we found out that all the stormwater pipe in that area is CMP pipe and is on its way out. It's also open ditch line through there and not a lot of curbing, so we've had some flooding issues in the past. So we tasked GBA with maybe coming up with a better solution, updating the infrastructure there, making some bigger storm boxes for more capacity, also slip lining the creek channel. We took this project to the CIP committee as recommended by council, and they gave their approval. We're bringing this back again to look for some guidance. The price came in at $184,000 for total construction of this project, and we're looking for guidance to get this project out to bid and try to move this forward in the 2019 construction season. Any questions or concerns about this project? I know we've talked about it a few times. And
Jimmy, okay?
I assume the staff recommendation is still to do the bid alternate and include the.
yes.
Yeah.
I think for the 18,000 or 19,000 basically, why the contractor's there and being able to fix that channel is, I mean, I think if you went out and just did that on its own as separate, you'd probably triple the cost of that, so. Doing that stuff while contractors are on site, not mobilizing twice and stuff really does save the city quite a bit of money.
Thank you, Brent.
And so take it to council, consent.
Yeah.
Consent, okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Brent.
you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And let's see, we have one more, don't you?
And a few
Come
words.
along here.
Stay there.
Welcome to my world.
H Road Street asset inventory. Brent.
So, as we've gone through, earlier this year, we were working on the stormwater side, trying to get our inventory together to access funds on the inventory side and future maintenance projects. We contracted through BAC Rhodes with that and had great success and got a 50% funding through the county on our asset management this year. So we've got that ball rolling. This kind of leads us into the next piece of it is an updated street program and compiling all the data we've collected in the last 4 years on core samples, pavement condition, sidewalk, curbing. We've got the information. It's a lot of information, so we're trying to get it into one database that makes sense and you can pull that information relatively quickly and come up with some new programs. We want to work with BAC Rhodes on this. 10 years ago we started the street program, and as we tried to address every street in town in the next 8 to 10 years, we ran into some situations where we found out that about 50% of the streets couldn't take the treatments that was recommended, so we kind of had to revamp that. We've kept pushing the street program forward and doing as much as we can, but there's some big dollar amounts wrapped around some of these maintenance projects coming up, so we want to work with BAC Rhodes and get a 5 or 10 year plan of funding, some matrices on what to fix, and coming up with some solutions and what's going to work. So we really want to get that process started with BAC Rhodes. So that's basically what this task order is about, and just start working into getting a long-term street program put back together with an updated with all the inventory and asset inventory stuff we have received in the last 4 years.
I had asked a question during our agenda review with regards to the Exhibit A,
Section
6.0, ownership of documents.
I haven't had it clarified. I've asked that question. I have not had it clarified, but we will before as soon as I get that, and I expect I'll have it before the end of the week, I'll send that out. But I think it's standard language because we have talked with them about us owning and that the database is not something that's proprietary. So,
Right.
but I am still waiting on that.
Okay.
That confirmation in writing from them.
Okay.
So we'll pass that on.
Yeah. Relatedly, I assume your question was about if we went with a different contractor later on, if we could use the work they've done. Yeah, I had that same.
And that's been what they told us.
I mean, yes, right. We already know what format. We know that it would be in spreadsheet and then also Google Earth files and all of the standard GIS documents. I mean, so it's not a proprietary format.
So that item probably should be modified before we agree to it.
I think that's more just boilerplate language.
Yeah.
And with all our engineering services, we've had, Olson did the core sampling, at Stantec, you know, everybody was willing, you know, we paid for that data, we paid for that service, so they were always willing to pass that back to me, and I could pass it to another firm. So
Okay,
we've never ran into that issue before since I've been here.
that's great.
So, I mean, they want your business again too eventually, so.
More of it.
You throw that out there, and you might not ever be talking to them again, so.
Any other questions about this item? Recommendation,
Take to council.
you want it on consent?
I don't know, what does everybody think
You
about
know,
that?
I just think it approve it consent-wise, but it might be worth bringing up. It's
Yeah.
nice to know citywide that we're getting street inventory.
Fair enough. All right, thank you. You want to move to the next one then?
Yes, we can do that.
So Martha, that's not consent, I guess. Task force order with GBA, proceed on the Foxridge Survey.
So as we've been going through the 5-year CIP and with some of these past projects I've worked on, kind of coming to the realization that it is beneficial to get started on some of this survey work ahead of schedule on these projects, coming up with cost estimates, easement acquisitions and utility issues and right-of-way issues that we've come across in the last couple of years. Foxridge is slated for 2021 full reconstruction. Wanting to move the funds to 2019 for the survey work. We will not be doing anything twice. This just helps us move that project forward a little quicker. Some preliminary design concepts. As you know, we've got some major stormwater issues over there, so there could be additional easements or right-of-way we got to require to get that infrastructure in to handle that water that's coming through that rock face. We're adding sidewalks. There could, you can get ahead of utility relocations. As you know, we got overhead power all through town, so sometimes we got to relocate power poles and stuff like that. So this is just giving us the ability to get ahead of schedule, get some preliminary designs, and kind of find out what we're working with, and start moving this project forward a little quicker, so we're not trying to push everything into 1 year and get this project out the door. And it'll also help with cost estimates as you get the survey work to complete it. They can more dial in the cost estimates to make sure our project's on track for the estimated costs we have now. So if we need to find more money, or if we got some money we can spend somewhere else because the cost of the project's gone down. So looking for $49,851 to start the survey work on Foxridge and come up with kind of a preliminary design and see what kind of right-of-way and easement acquisitions we might be running into in 2021.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I just have one quick question. Did you guys get that temporary patching or not so temporary patching?
They will be here Monday.
Monday,
So we are
okay.
shutting Foxridge down Monday morning and starting to tear it out. So
Okay, and that should be about a 2-day, did you say that it's going to be closed approximately?
we get 2 days on the road being closed for the big patches. It could be an additional couple days for there's about, from my memory, 800 feet of about a 6-foot patch running down the curb line but we don't have to shut the road down, just a barricade. So about 2 days that the road will be closed on the south side.
Will we be putting something on the website that says,
Come to you, I just found out today. It's coming. It's been a busy day, but it's coming. So we'll be able to have one-way traffic through there and temporary traffic control, so I think it'll move pretty quick. We're pouring high early too in those big patches, so within 6 hours we can give it back to traffic, so.
Okay, great, thank you.
Recommendation of this item?
take it to council?
Consent?
Consent.
Consent. Thank you.
Is
Great.
that it for it?
Get a break now, thank you.
Don't go too far.
Never too far.
We're good. That last one.
Can I ask a question before we move to discussion?
Debbie, yes.
I know this is going to be hard, and I apologize up front, but I want to be completely fair with every business we deal with. Could you give me a list of the businesses west of Lamar where they've each been required to do form-based code, where we've deviated, where there's incentives, where there's not? Because to me, honestly, I want somebody to be able to succeed. I want them to do what needs to be done. But if it's all over the board, we need to go back and look at the policy. Because
It's all over, we can do that, but it's all over the board, and we need to go back and revisit the policy.
Let's just make a plan on going back.
We are, yes.
Yeah, I don't know
That'll be
that-
part of the comprehensive
Yes.
plan.
I don't
Yes.
know that having them go through this is going to help in that issue. I think the issue is, what are the barriers, what are the issues that are creating the problems? And think that's what needs to be
That's what,
addressed.
I think if we could focus, our attention on those issues, and then those are the things that we take forward as part of the update of the comprehensive plan and potential revisions to the code.
Because it may be that it behooves us to look at a range of issues within the form-based code and not the extent way out here and not the minimum, but somewhere in between. That's not what the plan says.
Well, and I think even if you, for those
There's a range of issues.
who kind of listened, it was interesting, one of the things that the KU students addressed was the form-based code, and one of their comments was, I mean, there were pieces of it that they were complimentary of, and there were pieces of it that they were critical of. And, so we're collecting that information. That'll be one of those pieces that we broke down. But I think that's probably, if you're comfortable with that, I think that's a better use. I mean, it's just going to be all over the board.
I'm just uncomfortable giving mixed messages. I mean, I don't, if we're not doing that well, and it was a great intent, but it's not working, I think we need to look at that, because you're affecting the business climate. I want to balance.
Well, it's also putting the planning commission in a bad position, it's putting the council in a bad position with regards to this conflict.
Well, it's putting the staff, I mean, we're all
It's staff,
all
that's
three,
right.
it's a
That's
triangle, and
exactly
everybody's in
right.
a bad position.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You are correct. So,
And I think, again, I think there are a variety of issues, and part of that is time horizon over which, we expect to affect change in that area of town, which we knew was going to be challenging. A parcel size, are there standards that should be applied to larger should we do some additional work in looking at parcels? But I think if we can kind of break down and, take our experiences over trying to implement that over time, so that we can have that discussion about how do we balance the business-friendly climate with changing the character, and really it becomes a sustainability issue, right?
It
Because
does.
it's the sustainability of those buildings, so that we're not continually tearing down when something new wants to
that's
come to
exactly
town.
right.
So,
Plus, we need to look at it from a reconstruction of Johnson Drive, because
Right,
we
we're
didn't
investing
do Broadway,
tons more money.
Broadmoor, with form-based code in mind. We made some challenges.
I know,
And that was
Kristen.
mostly, and that was, you do the form-based code.
Exactly.
None of that has any several.
But, I think along the lines of what Debbie is saying is that, and it sounds like you're completely on the right track, but, looking at adjustments, I hesitate to say we should just, throw up our hands and throw out the form-based code completely, because I think if you look at the, the excerpts we got last time with how it fit into the comprehensive plan and really encouraging that mixed-use, sustainable development and higher density, that those are all going to be really important things for the city going forward. So I think it should be more, towards an eye of making it work and the adjustments that would make it work rather than.
and we're bumping, I mean, this project, and, we've had some conversations around Broadmoor, but, I mean, in effect, we've made it work, right? I mean, we've made those exceptions, we've looked at everything on a case-by-case basis, and ultimately, you either approved or not approved. And as Brian mentions, there are many things that don't come to you or to the planning commission because the developer understands the requirements. Those things happen in other areas of the city as well. So, it may be happening a little bit more frequently in the West Gateway, but, there are other things, whether it's the East Gateway Overlay District or the Downtown District, or some of those other pieces that impact, how people want to come in or what they might be able to, to look at doing. I mean, Brian recently had an automotive use that was in that, east of Knoll that wanted to come in, and, but, we had to say, no, that's not.
Well, that was clearly a violation.
Yeah.
How about earlier,
Right,
the
right.
auto
Yeah.
uses on,
Right.
I would kind of point you to the next item that's on the planning commission agenda. You kind of go back and read through those minutes from the meeting. That's a classic example where we had use that was automotive oriented,
Right.
that closed.
Yeah.
Somebody came, they wanted to buy it and put some money into it, make it into an automotive use again. Well, the little reading of the form-based code is that that person puts more than 40% of value into the building, they have to apply the form-based code. Well, it doesn't make sense to tear down a building and
Right.
build something new. So what we've done is we said you can get a non-conforming situation permit.
Right.
So you're basically making improvements, realizing that you're not doing that within the form-based code.
Okay.
And we've done that with a number of examples. McDonald's, the Slim Chicken is going into Taco Bell.
Hy-Vee years ago.
So, you could just leave a building sitting there vacant, or you could tell that business owner, oh, I'm sorry, you can't make those improvements.
Yeah.
Or you could work with them to try to, and we choose, at those points, we say, can we work on the color of the building? Can we improve your signs? But you can have a pole sign that's non-conforming.
Yeah. Right.
We have some landscaping. So we try to take advantage of those opportunities to make improvements that do comply with other components of the overall zoning ordinance.
And a lot of it, whether it should be or shouldn't be, or we're going out of policy setting, a lot of it is the look. Nothing to me looks better than Caw Valley when they come temporarily and have flowers all over. It just looks great. And to me, it doesn't matter what their use was or what the intent was for the use. It looks really good, and it makes the city look better, and people come and they use the product. So it's a balance.
You ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. Next items are discussion items. The first one is a facility conservation improvement program. Emily Randel.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is discussion only at this time. We wanted to share with you a presentation that the Sustainability Commission heard in last month at their June meeting. The council goal had included energy audit activity. We had that sort of slated for the fall of 2019. The Sustainability Commission, a member of that group, invited staff from the Kansas Corporation Commission to come speak specifically about the state of Kansas and their Facility Conservation Improvement Program, FCIP. We just heard a really detailed presentation, asked a lot of questions, and it sounds to us like a very promising avenue for us. The group is pretty unanimous about pursuing this. The idea is that we have that technical support from the staff to walk through this process, avoid an RFP process, and avoid having multiple contractors, and then also, most primarily, assuming the risk of any energy conservation savings that would be applied as a result of the improvements. Those projections and models are verified by technical experts up front on our behalf and at no cost to us. So really we have that person in the passenger seat all along with us that we really truly need, I think, to make that kind of project successful and pencil out and return the savings and do all of the things. So to us it was great. The timing is tricky. We didn't want to wait to bring it to you and to share the news of the program and to just kind of bring it to light a little bit, but they are currently in the process of reviewing their list of energy service companies from which you would choose a partner after some vetting. And then also just some of their general materials, FAQ sheets, things like that. They're all sort of being revamped as we speak. We expect them kind of any day, any day, any day. So as soon as we do get them, we'll share them forward. But we have kind of just a preliminary time frame to just keep this moving through the steps. And it would start with this conversation. So we just kind of, even though we're a little early, we wanted to share it just so that you could read about it and understand what we were targeting at this point.
Very good. Any questions?
No, that sounds good.
Yeah.
That's a no-brainer there.
Yeah, Debbie and I got to hear the presentation. I thought it was really great and really promising. I know Shawnee and some other cities around have used the program recently. So that was actually my question was, has staff had the chance yet to reach out to any of those neighboring communities that have used the program?
We haven't. I was hoping to know their list first to just
That
kind of
makes
tie that
sense.
together. We could do either. I'm sure the results will be similar. I'm not sure, they won't throw out all of the successful but I hadn't taken steps to do that before.
So who do we credit for coming up with this idea?
Mr. Manny Trio.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, we knew, we were definitely, the Sustainability Commission was in the information gathering phase. That was how they saw their role in playing to the council goal. And so it was in kind of the fact-finding mission that, and Manny has mentioned that program in the past. And but having the folks here in person was really, really convincing. I was especially pleased by when they said, when you're building out your timeline, give us ample time to review because we really do go through every single word and do the modeling and really review all of that, so you know that they're taking every bit of it very seriously. And their costs of the program are folded into the overall model, so that's how they are funded as well. So.
That's very good.
and we do have two members, the past chair and the current chair of the Sustainability Commission are in the audience and have done a really solid job in explaining everything and getting Solly and I on board with where they're going, and they do a great job.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. Next is the update on the speed limit and traffic signage on 51st Street, east of Lamar. Brent.
Thank you. This is a discussion item, updating you on the reduction of the speed limit on 51st at the March community development meeting. A resident voiced his concerns about the speed limit on 51st Street. That it was too low and wanted to raise the speed limit for the elevations on the hills and, increasing speed as you get to the bottom. We contracted with GVA to do an intersection site distance evaluation for speed limit and sign recommendations. They completed that. The recommendation was not to increase the speed limit along 51st Street, which I agree with, and I'm sure most of you do too. They did recommend moving some signs and adding some signage, which is attached in the memorandum from GVA. All those signs were updated, installed, and moved on June 28th by Public Works. So if you drive the corridor, we've had some signs moved and some updated signage. So I think we've helped address the problem. That's probably the steepest grade we have in town, so there's always going to be some issues over there with coming down those hills in winter and speed. But we're doing the best we can to address the issue. So we took all GBA's recommendations over there and got the stuff installed, and hopefully it helps out that situation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Brent.
And the time to look at additional changes would be in connection with a full depth reconstruction, but that's always going to be a challenging section of roadway just because of the way the driveway is and the storm drainage is set up and was originally constructed along there. But
it'd be a big ticket item if you really wanted to reconfigure that over there. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item are department updates. Laura.
I will give just a quick, I just wanted to let everyone know we have updated the current development section of the website for the Gateway Project, EPC project, and others that are tidal wave, all of that. So thank you, and we will stay on that much more frequently than what we have.
It's right here.
So
anyone ever needs it.
we will highlight.
Thank
Yes.
you. I'm gonna do that all the time.
So we're going to do that going forward. We didn't send anything out. I mean, we've got some of the posts out there, and when Emily does the Mission Monthly newsletter next week, we'll advise people that that updated information is out there. But just very quickly, kind of for the record, I think we've talked about it, and Councilmember Crane alluded to earlier, but had a lot of questions recently about why no construction activity on the Gateway site. And that was, as you know, with the lease that they signed with the Signage project back in December, they're having to go back and reevaluate their phasing. They had to go back and get some additional financing put in place, which they did back in March. And they then needed, because of the connections for the Signage building, needed some additional permitting through Johnson County wastewater. And that was a process that has been going back and forth. They last week got everything, or 2 weeks ago got everything into Johnson County wastewater that Johnson County wastewater needed in order to be comfortable in signing off on a foundations and footings letter. We have reviewed that internally and issued a building permit for them to start work on the foundations and footings. So they should.
Building permit, yeah.
Not yet, but it's in, it will be in progress.
Got the letter from Johnson County wastewater saying that they can move forward with doing footings, and then got the final set of plans from the architect sitting in our office, waiting for our consultant to come in and stamp them, and we're waiting for the contractor to come and ask for his building.
Who is the contractor?
A company called VCC. They're a nationwide contractor. They specialize in building movie theaters.
Movie theater?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
They do all the country.
And then
They had to get their Johnson County license. That was one of the things that was slow
been submitted, so we're in the process of reviewing those. So we'd love to see the equipment and more activity on the site, but there's been a lot going on.
We also issued a building permit to Fogel Anderson for construction of the apartments. So they've stepped into the shoes of neighbors, and they'll begin the construction process for the apartments, probably this fall sometime.
Any other updates?
I think that's it.
Just want to say congratulations on a successful 4th of July or 6th of July
Thank you.
family picnic. It was excellent, and both your staff and Parks and
Recreation did a
a great job.
fantastic job, as did
And,
Public Works.
And the fireworks were phenomenal.
Thanks.
They were phenomenal.
We were pleased to be able to do that, and next year we'll get it back on the right weekend. So we hopefully have a little bit bigger crowd. That was probably the one. Right, so it's typically the second Saturday in July, so that people who travel for the 4th of July weekend are able to do that and not miss our
Fireworks.
summer family picnic and fireworks. So looking forward to that.
Thank you
But
very
thank
much.
you for that.
Appreciate it, and I will turn it over 1 minute late to Solid.
We do have a marathon facing us. Can we take like a 3-minute break?
Yep, absolutely.
So, yes, formally close out the community development committee.
Consider it closed.
Did they go on a day trip?
Here, it's page 1 of the FAA minutes.
Okay.
In the first paragraph, under the project ordinance heading, there's a sheet in the
Okay.
It's like I knew I saw it.
That's an easy fix. Yeah, I can deal with that.
I'll call our Finance Administration meeting to order at 7:37. Tonight, we don't have any public hearings or public presentations, but we do have 11 action items, followed by our recommended 2020 budget and one additional discussion item to go through. So first up, we have Martha with acceptance of the June 5th, 2019 Finance and Administration Committee minutes. Does anyone have any comments or changes?
Good job, Martha.
Good job, Martha.
Thank you. All right, and then next we have the resolution designating Sunflower Festival as a city-sponsored festival event. Emily.
Hello. This is coming back to you. We always do a resolution to pass to allow for the consumption, I suppose, of alcohol in the designated area for special events. That list came to you earlier this year with what we thought were the lists of festivals and events, including each night of the 12-week Mission Market season, as well as the Sunflower Festival. The Sunflower Festival Committee has been meeting and decided this year to move their event from the date we anticipated, August 24th, to a date in October on the 12th. So this is just taking that action to allow for that activity on that date.
Absolutely not. Yes, let's take that to
Recommended?
Consent?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, consent.
All right.
Why did that have to come back? Just for the change of date?
Yep.
And why did they change it from August?
Because it was too hot in August. We need a way better turnout this year.
And Laura's ready to go. So first up, we have our Rolling Court Townhomes Development Agreement.
Yes, if there's anybody who needs any additional information about the Rolling Court Townhome situation, please raise your hand. We have been working on this for almost 2 years now. Several pieces on your agenda tonight. The first is a development agreement. So part of our conversation with the Homes Association was that once we created the CID and we moved forward with this project, that we wanted to sort of memorialize and outline everyone's expectations of one another in a development agreement. And so that's what this agreement does. And I am happy to answer. It's pretty straightforward. It just kind of lays out generally the costs as we've anticipated them in the CID, mirrors what's in the CID petition or the revised CID petition. Talks about the city being responsible for awarding the contracts and supervising the completion of the improvements, and that the improvements would be considered a city project. We ultimately believed that we would get better pricing and better control. Early on in the conversation, we talked about potentially letting two contracts, both for design and construction. Ultimately, that it made more sense, we thought, for the city to do that, so that's covered in here. And basically then we release one another from liability or claims resulting from the actions of implementing and getting these improvements.
Jumping ahead on us, Laura, the release was number 4.
There's a release paragraph. I'm reading the release paragraph in the development agreement. Yes,
It's my understanding that these, as we recommend them, are going to go in non-consent. Is that correct? All of these are non-consent?
This one would not have to. This one could go on consent. Anything related to the issuance of the bonds would not go on the consent.
Okay. Then I would recommend that we release consent.
All right, so next up, we have another related document. We have the mutual release agreement between the City Rolling Court Townhomes Association and Johnson County Wastewater, Oregon.
Yes, so again, as part of this project, there was the failure back in August of 2017. It caused damage to a native sanitary sewer line that was owned by Johnson County Wastewater. And they came in and made those repairs to the tune of about $330,000. They would have the ability in this situation or many others to come back and assess the costs of those repairs against the impacted property owners. Not wanting to add to the cost of the project, we had really just engaged in a conversation, and Johnson County Wastewater said, as we move towards a solution where everybody was essentially going to participate and have some skin in the game, Johnson County Wastewater said we would be willing to absorb those repair costs if the city and the Homes Association are going to participate financially in getting this section of creek taken care of. So this document was drafted and has been circulated to the Homes Association and to Johnson County Wastewater. You can see Johnson County Wastewater actually has already executed it. And again, it just basically allows us to hold one another harmless through that process.
Move this also.
That could go to consent if you were.
Sounds good. All right, next up, we have our 2019A general obligation bond sale. Laura again.
Yes, so these you won't really recommend anything this evening. We put them because they will appear as an action item on your July 17th agenda. But we won't have all of the information to fill in the blanks until we get through the actual bond sale on the morning of July 17th. But we wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to review the basic documents and to see where the blanks and that information will be dropped in. So as you know, we've been working and moving in this direction, and back in June, the staff was directed to undertake the next steps with our financial advisors to proceed to offer General Obligation Bond Series 2019A for sale. The issue is going to be used to finance repairs to the Rock Creek Channel from just east of Knoll to Roland Drive, and also includes the repair and restoration of the parking and common areas of the Roland Court townhomes. The portion of the project cost attributable to the Roland Court townhomes is going to be repaid through special assessments collected via a community improvement district that was established by Ordinance 1498. The city's portion of the debt service on the bonds is anticipated to be paid from the Stormwater Utility Fund, primarily from repayments of the special assessment on the Gateway project, but also potentially stormwater utility fees. The project is estimated at just over $5 million, and we are anticipate issuing bonds with net bond proceeds of $4.1 million, and that's because we have cash reserves in the Stormwater Utility Fund that will cover that gap. So the design of this project was about $694,000. That contract was awarded in June. The GBA has mobilized. In fact, there was a project kickoff meeting on Monday. I think, and Sheldon can confirm, there's probably been surveyors. I don't know. Well, you don't look out your back window and see that any longer.
I just don't know if there's this week or not.
They anticipate starting to have survey crews out this week, and so we're working through. The city had several existing easements along that creek channel, so one of the first steps is identifying where we have gaps in those easements, and we'll be sending the survey crews out and really just getting that whole process moving forward. So the documents included in your packet will be what you consider at that July 17th meeting. So you'll actually take 3 separate actions when we get to next Wednesday night. The first would be acceptance of the winning bidder, and then you would pass an ordinance authorizing the sale of the bonds, and then you would pass a resolution which prescribes all of the really incredibly boring details associated with the bond sale and other reporting requirements. So next week we will have both our financial advisor and bond counsel here to present the results of that sale to us. We expect that we will have results and multiple bidders on that, so we will look forward to bringing that forward next Wednesday evening. The bids will open at 10 a.m. on next Wednesday morning. You all received an email, I think Friday, that included the preliminary official statement, which is a document that it's the big fancy marketing brochure with a whole lot of information, both legal and otherwise. And I've sort of described it as the combination of our budget document and our CAFR, but it is intended by potential investors in the bonds to be able to get a sense of not only the project and the improvements being financed, but the city's overall financial condition as they make a decision about whether or not to purchase those bonds. So that is the purpose of the preliminary official statement. If you want to read all of the pages, you're welcome to do that. Some of it's kind of interesting to just kind of see what's included in all of that. But that will be deemed final once again, there are some blanks in that will be deemed final once the bond sale occurs and the council authorizes all of that, and it will become kind of the official document. We did participate in a rating call with Standard & Poor's last week. On July 2nd, I believe our issue goes to their rating committee tomorrow, and so we hope to have our rating report maybe as soon as Friday. Obviously, anticipation of that. They can't give us any general indication, but many of the things that were noted in previous rating reports in terms of the continued need to rebuild fund balance and reach the council's fund balance goals and policies, and some of those types of things have been accomplished since the last time we issued debt, so we're hopeful that we might have a favorable look at a potential upgrade. So we'll share that as soon as that becomes available. Happy to answer any questions over the rest of the process or anything included in the documents.
Great job. It's a lot of work.
I'd forgotten. It's been a while since we've done this, and some of the requirements have changed just in terms of the due diligence requirements and the other things that everyone is required to do, which is a good thing. But yeah, it was good exercise. So we're looking forward to that.
So we don't.
You don't take any action. This will just essentially appear and it will be at the top of the agenda. So we haven't had anything for a long time, but if you recall, the base of your city council agenda, issuance of notes and bonds, happens right at the very beginning, even before the consent agenda.
Any other questions? Next up, we have the ordinance certifying the Rolling Court Townhome special assessments. Laura.
So this is, again, another step in the process of the CID assessment and petition process. It can be done at varying points in this process, and we've talked with bond counsel, but essentially what this ordinance does is it certifies the maximum amount of the assessments to match what was included and approved in the CID petition. And the reason that we bring it forward now, and we've talked and we've had multiple conversations with the Homes Association about what's that final amount going to be, and when does it get certified, and how do we impact all of that. So this amount will be certified at the same maximum amount included in the CID petition, but it does not go to the county, to the tax rolls, until the project is actually all the way through construction and been signed off on, and we have all of those final costs accounted for. The reason that we do it now is because there is a 60-day protest period following the certification of the maximum assessments. You don't want to build your project and be 18 months down the road and then go certify the assessments and have someone object to that. So we want to know now, before we go to bid, if we're going to have any objections. So this would, by adopting this ordinance, we trigger the protest period that would expire in August, which will keep us well in advance of the period of time within which we would be going out to take the project to bid.
Questions?
Recommend that this go non-consent.
Well, there will be a public hearing on this. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So there is a public hearing component of this. There will be a public hearing, and all of the property owners in the Rolling Court Townhomes received a notice, or should have received a notice. I'm assuming you got yours. Yeah. Notifying them of that piece.
So when does that hearing take place?
So that hearing actually takes place next week on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yep. And so we'll have the public hearing, you'll consider the ordinance, and then if you approve it, the protest period will expire on August 23rd.
Sheldon, do you have any sense of how things are going?
I think everything's moving along fine in people's minds.
Yeah.
The only thoughts I've got are there were, I think, 3 people that said they weren't in full support of the amendments we made to replace all the asphalt. And so if people want to seek, that would be the only consideration there. But even then, we had a majority vote to replace all. So I think we're fine. We're on mindset.
Thank you.
We're painting right now. Everybody's worried about that.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have the Kansas Statewide Housing Assistance Program Resolution and Cooperation Agreement with Laura again.
Yes, so we recently had a call for an open records request asking for a copy of a resolution and the cooperation agreement that we passed related to the statewide housing assistance program. And so in the process of responding to that request, we, you always wonder where that's coming from. It came from Gilmore and Bell, but not our regular bond counsel. We were able to find the resolution that the city passed, but we were not able to find the cooperation agreement. So in conversations with Gilmore and Bell, they have asked us to consider readopting both of those documents if we are interested in continuing our participation in the statewide housing assistance program. So this is a program, the state of Kansas does not allow for, did not allow for back then in the 90s, and it still does not allow for the issuance of single-family mortgage bonds by a state agency. So if that's going to be done, it has to be done at a local level. It's interesting because I think Councilmember Inman may remember that this was a topic that one of the panelists at the UCS panel on accessible housing talked about, that being a real limitation at the state level. So it's interesting that this sort of all popped up within the same time frame. But apparently what triggered all of this is the firm that had been responsible for maintaining the records went out of business or is no longer in existence. And so as those records have transitioned over to Gilmore and Bell, and they have been doing an inventory and an assessment of that, they realized that they were missing certain pieces. So they were reaching out to the communities that had originally authorized and were participating in the program to see if they couldn't secure copies of those. And I know for sure in our case, in the case of the city of Prairie Village and the city of Olathe, they were not able, we haven't been able to locate both pieces of that. So we had one or the other.
Do you have a date on when it was signed?
So it was 1998.
21
I
years.
don't have it.
Well,
I have all my stuff.
September 9th of 1998. We don't have it scanned anywhere. It's not included in a council packet that we can find. We did find the resolution, which we included in your packet. So the primary benefit of the program is to reduce interest rates or offer down payment assistance for low and moderate income home buyers who meet eligibility requirements. The program eligibility requirements are based on federal rules, and the subsidies are created among other things, the issuance of those single-family mortgage bonds. I attached a program flyer that had some limited information, and the website if you were interested in looking at all of that. Nearly all of the cities in Johnson County participate. Again, those cities who have not been able to locate the previous documentation are being asked to reaffirm their participation. And I know that's going forward in Prairie Village, I think next week. They sent me their council packet documents very soon. There aren't any costs or administrative responsibilities for the city of Mission to participate. Entering into the cooperation agreement just allows people who reside in Mission the opportunity to access the program. In the last 4 years, I didn't ask for data over the life. I figured Gilmore and Bell had their hands full just trying to get everything else wrapped up, but they did share that over the last 4 years, the program has originated 8 mortgages in Mission. So there are people who are accessing the program. The mortgages averaged about $153,224 and had a total value of slightly over $1.2 million. The program can be used for all types of loans, FHA, VA, conventional loans, as long as the homebuyer meets the other lending requirements of that. The program is promoted through lenders, not really by the cities. Any lender can participate in that program, and again, they're responsible for advertising that to mortgage applicants. So, based on the resolution that we were able to find that was, again, authorized in September of 1998, which we think signals our desire to participate in the program back then, and in light of the conversations that we're having around accessible housing, staff is recommending that we reaffirm our participation by adopting a new resolution and cooperation agreement.
There be no downside to it, or take it to council.
Take it to council consent.
Yeah.
Sylvester Paul's signatures, that's great.
Yeah.
It's so gross that
As the city clerk,
You
I
can
think.
sign his name, can't you?
No, Martha might be able to. I can.
This is
I'll
being
bet,
recorded.
I'll bet Martha has.
All right, next up, we have Brian with the post-issuance debt compliance and continuing disclosure policies and procedures.
Y'all good with it? Thumbs up? Any consent? All right, let me off that easy, are you?
Sure.
Okay, so Laura just kind of briefly went through all the bond documents. One of the requirements that we were informed, going through all the, preparing for the bonds, was that we needed to update City Council Policy 127, which pertains to post-issuance requirements for debt compliance. So there's a lot of history in the staff packet, but suffice to say that there's been a lot of changes in the federal regulations probably within the last decade. A lot of that kind of coming out of the housing crisis and the recession and a number of bond frauds that occurred with public entities across the country. And so one of the requirements now is continuing disclosure. In particular, the city is now required to disclose every year to the Electronic Municipal Market Access, or EMA, all of our outstanding debt and any issues that we may have with that debt, or anything that any potential investor needs to be aware of pertaining to that debt. That was not covered in the existing policy 127. So we have added that to the policy. The policy essentially was two documents, a policy and procedures. And I thought it would be too easy for those two to get separated, one get lost. So I combined them into one document, a policy and procedure statement. And when I did that, I made the procedures all addition. So everything showed up in blue. But for the most part, it's all the same. What is new is Section 5. Section 5 is procedures for continuing disclosure compliance. And it lists off a number of requirements that I'm supposed to do, that I would draw your attention down to Section 5, letter H. And this is the real meat of it. The Finance Director will monitor mandatory material events specifically identified in accordance with the rules, federal regulations, file required notices within 10 days of occurrences, and list off 14 or so material events that if I become aware of them as a finance director, I'm required to notify him within 10 days. Rating changes, defeasance, obligation calls, incurrence of financial obligations to the city, material or agreements to covenants, etc. So that's the real meat of it right there.
Is that reviewed by the audit as well? Is the audit?
Yeah, so a lot of these things would wind up as a footnote in the audit. So.
Well, for example, if we get a rating change, if we get a rating upgrade, we'll need to report that to them. So that's, when you look at H6, I mean, in part, your mind goes to a downgrade in a rating,
Right.
but there are a lot of those little pieces.
Report the good news too.
Yes.
And we don't always do a rating associated with the bond issue. There are times where Standard & Poor's, especially Moody's, they do this about once a year, about this time of the year when we complete our audit, they'll reach out to me and ask for a copy of our audit. And they actually did a ratings call with Lamar and I a couple of years ago. And we weren't issuing debt, but they decided they wanted to do a ratings call and evaluate our rating. And they kept it at a AA. But if that had changed, then we would have been required to notify him about that. So we're already doing this. We gather together material and we report to Emma every year in June after we finish our audit. We include a copy of the audit with the report. So that's kind of the meat of it. That's the new component, and that's going to be required. It's kind of driving this is that when we issue the debt, one of the pieces of paperwork that can fly back and forth is a certificate of compliance with this that the underwriters are going to be looking for. So we'll have to provide a certificate of compliance back to the underwriters stating that we're compliant with all the post-issuance disclosure requirements and the continuing disclosure compliance.
Did you have another question? Anything else for Brent?
So this one does not have to go, this is a council policy, so you could put this on
Consent.
either consent or regular if you want.
Hey, let's put that thing on consent.
Second.
Next, we have our surplus property resolution. Brian.
That's you, don't go to.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Almost.
Let's put that on consent.
You guys go with it? Can we move along?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
I agree.
I think we know that.
All right, so next we have our police department radio replacement with Chief Hadley.
Don't tell me mine's not gonna be quite that fast. Thanks, Brian.
Expensive toys.
So these radios that I have right here are approximately 15 years old and they're Motorola's. Those were mandated that we purchased those that long ago. About 5 years ago, Johnson County Emergency Management started talking with Motorola and Harris about the changeover that they knew was coming. Department of Homeland Security has mandated that people that want current and future grant money need to be switched over by 2020. So 2 years ago, back in 2017, we started meeting with Harris and Motorola. Those are the two companies that came forward to all the agencies in Johnson County to look at the radios. The radios are very similar as far as Motorola would be just a little bit cheaper. I will tell you that the service provider for Motorola is down at Cominco downtown. We've done business with them in the past. KCOM puts all of the lights and builds all of our cars and everything for us, puts the cameras in. They are the Harris vendor. We struggled heavily with Motorola's service people and their customer service, and we could not get a paper copy of what the quote would be. They quoted us that it would be a little bit less than what Harris was. So, right. So I have to commend the command staff, especially Captain Lane and Captain Self. When you start planning something 2 years ago and we have to give you a number over 12 months ago on what it's going to be, and trade-in values and everything change almost on a quarterly basis. You really don't know what it's going to be. We ended up coming up $6,433.30 over budget. I've talked to Laura about that, and to make up that difference, we will take that out of some of our equipment line items that we have. And I'll just have to tell Dan that he doesn't get any more suits. That's it. So we would ask that our recommendation is $231,433.30. That will get us 40 brand new portables and 18 new mobiles for the cars. It comes with all the earpieces, the mics, the holders, everything. If the choice were to be made that you don't want to switch and you want to keep what we have, we can still dispatch from these. We will not have any of the encrypted channels. So if we have to call the Nexus SWAT team out to pump tear gas into something, or there's a car chase or something, we do not get that. And then, of course, DHS and the grants, we wouldn't be able to apply for those or keep those going.
Could I get a couple of the old units?
They're all being traded in. Sorry.
That's the
Do you
recovery.
know, this is kind of random, but do you happen to know off the top of your head what the trade-off, like how much in DHS grant money we get versus the mandates like this that we get?
Well, we haven't, I don't know that we've specifically referred or received Homeland Security funds. Most of those flow through Mark and a committee that they have. And so actually, the compliance deadline was established through that group. So you don't need to, and I will tell you that this is, I'd have to go back and look, but it's pretty darn comparable in price to what we paid for these radios 15 years ago.
Wow.
They don't, it's a pretty constant charge. I mean, was not a significant difference. So we didn't want to jeopardize that opportunity, and when we look at kind of a 15-year life, but Homeland Security is really driving that because of the interoperability. And so for agencies to be able to communicate and in those kinds of events. So we did look at that, and we aren't trading off anything immediately. It was just more that future capability and that communication with the other agencies. And if you amortize that over, 12 or 15-year period, it's a pretty reasonable cost.
Any questions or recommendations?
Recommend you take that to council. It's a lot of money, so I wouldn't put it on consent.
I also recommend you tell Motorola afterward that you've had some issues with their customer service.
We have.
Well, this ought to tell
It
them.
didn't get very far.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Next, we get Laura back for authorization for the contract with SFS Architecture for Phase 2 Space Needs Analysis.
Yes, so in February, we released an RFQ looking to do a space needs analysis, a facility needs assessment for City Hall and the Police Department. And really what we were looking for was whether or not building renovation, new construction, lease space, or some combination thereof was going to be the most practical, what would be the most practical and cost-effective solution for meeting both our current and our future space needs. In 2019, the issues that are really kind of driving our conversations around that include ADA compliance. We know we have a lot of issues here at City Hall and in the police department for both employees and the public. Locker and changing room limitations in the police department. Inadequate workspace, both respect to square footage and file storage, record storage, really across all of the departments here in City Hall. Storage needs, kind of aging facility and infrastructure systems, whether that's HVAC, parking, particularly at this time of year. Sally port design, and just property and evidence storage, a lot of things related more specifically to the public safety functions. And as things have changed and adapted and technologies have improved over the years, we don't have a building design that has been able to keep up with that. Correct. So the council authorized in March and April of this year, we went through a selection process. We selected SFS Architecture, and they really broke down their initial proposal into 2 phases. And the first was, let's get through a conversation and kind of a survey process with the departments to talk about what are the challenges now, what do we anticipate in terms of future needs, both staffing and storage, what adjacencies make sense. So, is it the most efficient setup to have the municipal court clerks load up the tickets and everything and come sit up here in windows, or we're constantly sending people back and forth? Are there better adjacencies? Are there departments or divisions or staff that maybe could function more efficiently if they were closer together or could share a variety of different things? So we have been through phase 1. We are currently working through the preliminary report. The chief and I have been through 3 rounds so far, and we're about ready to share that with the rest of the leadership team in terms of kind of making those final revisions. But as we suspected, when we step back and look overall at the end of phase 1, we have about 22,000 square feet in this building now. The initial look says we really should have closer to about 43,000. There's some refining that needs to be done there. So obviously, keeping both of us in this building is probably not feasible. But keeping one or the other or some components in this building may absolutely be a feasible and cost-effective way to do that. And so the second phase of the SFS proposal was to say, if that possibility existed, then we would come back and ask the council to authorize phase 2 for us to really do the in-depth analysis of the structural components, the mechanical components of this building, so that when we come back with that total picture, we're really able to give you that complete picture. If we just brought here's what we think we need in terms of square footage, you know, the chief and I had a list as long as both of our arms in terms of the questions we knew you would have and we still have relative to, you know, what does that mean in terms of options and alternatives. So our recommendation at this point is to proceed with that phase 2. And one of the most important things is that some of the building code requirements have changed since this facility was constructed, particularly with respect to a facility that is an emergency management or emergency operations facility. So building hardening and some other things, and so that's one of the pieces that we will be evaluating, is whether or not we have the ability or it's cost effective at all to look at some of those solutions in this building. So we're looking for authorization to proceed with the next steps of that in order to allow us to get that comprehensive report and recommendations ready for you later this fall.
Are we gonna get any kind of idea about the cost? Or is that a totally different ballgame?
We will, but that's what we have to get through with phase 2. So right now, I could tell, you know, we'd have to just say we need 40-some-odd thousand square feet, and we'd have to start refining some of those costs, and so it becomes a site issue, a building construction issue, and that's why we want to break down the evaluation of this building so we can hone in on those costs. So we can tell you, what do we think the cost would be to do renovation in this building? What do we think new construction costs would be, or some combination there? So when we come back in the fall, there will be costs.
Okay.
Yes,
The,
absolutely.
The scope of services exclusion will not look at other sites or any of the options of other designs. So they're just going to look at this building and what this building has and what it lacks.
They will. They won't do a site evaluation or assessment, but
Right.
part of what phase 1 did was identify the acreage to support, which will then help us start to even look at potential. So we can do some of that. So there's information in that first phase, and we will ask them. One of the things we've started the conversation with, and they've been hesitant to commit to, is a per square foot cost for a new construction.
Okay.
And so we will continue to push them on that component as well. But we have enough data to be able to say, and again, that's why we want to break it up. So if there's some piece that stays here, that obviously is going to reduce, you know, the acreage and a lot of those kinds of things. So, yes, there will be dollars associated. And we wanted them to be responsible dollars that we could explain.
Yep, Pat?
Yeah, I think she addressed it a little bit. You said in the fall they would have this back?
We'll bring you back a report. I can't remember how long they said it would take them to complete phase 2, but it's not.
Yeah, it was.
They got through phase 1
Couple of months.
quickly. Yeah, a couple
It
of
was
months.
gonna take a couple months, and then they need to meet with us before they come back here.
Okay, good.
So we can make sure they did what they were supposed to.
Anything else for Laura?
Okay, council, I don't know if you want to do consent.
Yeah.
Consent.
I'll do consent.
All right. So next we move on to our 2020 budget, and we have the recommended 2020 budget and budget resolution from Laura.
So with the consent of the chair, I might ask that we do the second discussion item first.
Sure.
And then we can just focus on the budget and
That
Go
seems
from
to make
there.
sense. So
Okay.
first we have the change in date for swearing in of newly elected officials.
So Senate Bill 105, which took effect July 1st, allows cities to set the date when newly elected officials can be sworn in. You may recall that a couple of years ago, the legislation was changed and required cities to transition to the November election with the swearing in of anyone who was elected. A November election, the second Monday in January. And that can create a number of challenges. You know, you may have elected officials who were not reelected, who then are meeting and making decisions and voting on issues for a period of time, and it can set up, I mean, it can either go well or it has the potential to create some challenges. So what we have now with the passage of Senate Bill 105 is an opportunity to look at moving that up as early as the December 1st. And so we wanted to bring that to you for your consideration, since we do have an election this November. It would require a charter ordinance in order to make that change. The league, after the legislation was passed, the league took some time to kind of go back and create the sort of infographic flow chart that we included in your packet that describes, it depends on how you adopted the changes to the election cycles about how you revise this. So in our case, we would need to make a revision to the charter ordinance, and there are some specific publication requirements there that we would want to make sure we consider that and get out ahead of the November election, so we're clear on that. So the earliest, so part of the question is the earliest you could swear in would be December 1st. In our case, then it still begs the question of, do we hold a special meeting? Do we call a special meeting, which is what we were having to do to meet that second Monday in January requirement, or do you want to handle that at just the regularly scheduled December city council meeting? So we think that the date that coincides with an existing council meeting probably eliminates the most confusion, extends that swearing in a couple of weeks, but again, you accomplish that. The other problem that, and we didn't have that, but some cities I know experienced a challenge with calling the special meeting where they didn't have council members who would show up for that special meeting. And so I think if the council's interested in entertaining a change, I think the staff recommendation would be to move to the council meeting, the December council meeting date.
So third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday.
Yeah, I think the way it can be worded is that you have the flexibility of doing something until January, right? So you could word do that as a preferred date, but you also could word it in such a way that
By such and such.
by, what is it, the second week in January? Second Monday.
By the second Monday.
Yeah, so it has to be, it can be any date
You go to the
on or
second-
after December 1st, as long as it's before the second Monday in January. And so, again, if we have it coincide, rather than pick a specific date,
Right.
if we have it coincide with our regular meeting days, then we know we're not going to run into weekends or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that sounds
Does it
great.
make sense?
Makes sense.
And so again, as a charter ordinance, it takes effect 61 days after passage because there is a petition period that exists.
Or I did have one note about the current charter ordinance, because would we be amending ordinance 27? Would that be the way we do it? Or
We actually adopt a new charter ordinance.
Okay, so I was gonna say section 6 isn't consistent with how filing for office with the county works. You can either choose petition signatures or pay a fee, and this has, I think this is a smaller number of signatures than you have to do if you do it by signature at the county. In the county, it's a choice, so this says the nomination petition must be signed by 10 of the qualified electors of the city of Mission. I don't think that's what happens when you go to the county election office.
That's great.
Okay?
Any questions or thoughts on the date?
No, I think that's a good suggestion to do it. And this is something you're going to come back to with us. with
Yes, the
your-
question is, would you like it as an action item in August?
That sounds
Sure.
Okay. That will line you up, and the charter ordinance would then take effect prior to the November election.
All right, so I guess we'll move on to our 2020 recommended budget and budget resolution.
So for the last couple of months, we have been working through the budget process, as we do every summer, looking at what are our goals and objectives, and eventually trying to move to a recommended budget, in this case for 2020. The packet that was provided really just pulls together much of the information that we've seen in other committee meetings and work sessions up to this point, and tries to incorporate that in a final recommended budget for council consideration. So in the 2020 recommended budget, we have total revenues across 16 different funds of $21.84 million and total expenses of $26.89 million. That difference is generally accounted for by the use of reserve that are carried over or project funds that were available in one year and not expended. So a lot of that happens in our capital project funds. I will kind of quickly step through the specifics, and please feel free to stop me at any point. I'll kind of get through. I know several council members had asked for some additional information on the recommendation around a directed patrol unit. So Captain Madden and the chief will kind of make a presentation and we can answer questions. Certainly, if there are any of the other supplemental requests or other things included in the budget that you'd like some additional information on, we can address those as well. But I'm going to start with the general fund. That is the city's largest fund and covers all of our operating departments on an annual basis. Total estimated revenues in 2020 in the general fund are about almost 13.5 million, or an increase of about 2% over what we've estimated in 2019. Sales, there's a little bit of growth in sales tax. Franchise fees, most of our revenues are flat. There's a little bit of growth in the community center overall, and that's because we really reduced community center revenues down to meet sort of realistic levels, and now we're kind of growing incrementally. So that has been a little bit confusing as we've adjusted to what we often refer to as the Planet Fitness effect, which has primarily impacted our annual membership revenue categories. The largest change in the 2020 revenue stream is in plan review and inspection services. We estimated about a 64% decrease, and that's because we had large permit and plan review fees that came in connection with the EPC project and the Gateway project in 2019. Currently, we have not included any new revenue streams in the 2020 recommended budget. Our final valuation numbers that were received from the county appraiser the end of June indicated a total assessed valuation of about $160 million, or just overall about a 2.2% increase. Based on the calculations that we've done with respect to the property tax lid, we will be able to maintain our current mill levy of approximately 17.878 mils. That will adjust slightly as we get to final certification and the county works through any remaining properties that are being protested, but it's very minor modification. You may recall that of that total mill levies, the equivalent of about 7 mils are assessed for street maintenance and street repairs, and those are transferred to the capital improvement fund, and then the balance is available and dedicated to general fund operations. When we look at the general fund expenditures, we don't start with a zero-based budgeting approach, but we do go through each line item annually. And the recommended 2020 budget has incorporated a number of council goals and objectives that have been expressed over the course of the last year and beyond. So part of those, or those assumptions that are included in this recommended budget include continuing to subsidize a portion of the solid waste utility, and we'll come back and circle back to that because we have some unique challenges, I think, in this fiscal year as we look at a contract that's expiring. We looked at and assumed that we would maintain the franchise and mill rate rebate program at 100% of city franchise fees, 75% of the total city mill, excluding special assessments, which is the stormwater utility fee, and then 50% of the solid waste utility fee. That program is really intended to allow residents who are income eligible the opportunity to receive a portion of those fees back. We continue to look at, although we are not making a specific contribution to the Equipment Reserve and Replacement Fund, we continue to highlight and look at that, and that remains, I think, a priority as we move forward. We've built that up. We're actually recommending some expenditures from that in 2020. Personnel costs reflect, as currently included, about a 3.5% merit pool increase and no budgeted lapses in full-time equivalents or full-time employees. What that means is when we do have those position vacancies, those savings just roll over into the general fund balance. Additional personnel included in the 2020 budget are discussed in detail in the supplemental request, so we'll come back to those. But it does include, depending on how we look at it, 2 or 3 new positions. Additional market adjustments that we may want to consider in accordance with our 2017 classification compensation study have not been currently accounted for in the recommended budget, but we will review those as we do each fall in connection with the 2020 salary structure and what's been adopted. We may find ourselves needing to consider some additional market adjustments. We're in that cycle where the larger cities have gone back out and updated their classification and compensation studies. So in order for us to be able to keep up with our policy and goal of being at 60% of the market, we'll need to reevaluate that piece later this fall. We planned for an increase in health and welfare benefits of approximately 15% over the 2019 rates. You may recall that we had a 0% increase this year, but we can't anticipate that every year. So 15% looking in going forward. We've maintained funding for the Business Improvement Grant Program. We have continued to maintain an increased park maintenance budget. The community center budget is currently achieving a cost recovery of about 72%. And again, we continue to look at opportunities to impact and improve that cost recovery percentage. And then funding for the highest priority capital and technology equipment purchases for each department based on those planned replacement and identified needs. So in 2020, the recommended general fund expenditures, including transfers, total about $13.59 million, and actually reflect a decrease even with the supplemental request included of about 1% from the 2019 budget. That decrease is driven primarily by a reduction in the amount of capital purchased in or recommended for purchase in 2020 and the transfer of a portion of that purchase of capital equipment to the Equipment Reserve and Replacement Fund instead of the general fund. One of the things that we talked about previously was looking at technology and capital equipment. When we first presented a base budget for 2020, we identified those items which we felt from a technology and equipment standpoint were sort of mission critical to our daily operations. And so we included those in the base budget and detailed those. They've been detailed again in your packet this evening in that memorandum. And those items, some of those items we recommended were be incorporated in the 2019 budget, particularly several things related to technology improvements. Microsoft Office licensing upgrades and the replacement of the building permitting and code enforcement software in the community development department. So overall, kind of those technology and equipment requests that were included in the base budget totaled $474,000, $82,000 of which have been incorporated in the 2019 estimated budget, and the remaining $392,000 in the 2020 budget. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions about any of those items included from a technology and equipment standpoint in the general fund budget?
You said the general fund, so does that include the general override?
Yes.
Okay. So I was wondering how we got to the Wi-Fi access points, the hubs, how we identified that need. Because I know that service in this building and even around it is kind of shoddy, and we do need things. And I'm pretty sure I thought we had boosters that would help us. And I guess my concern is that these Wi-Fi access points or these hubs, they want the same technology, like the same wavelength as your wire. So any issues that we have now, your box or your access points are still going to encounter those issues. So I didn't know how we came to it.
So we had Yeah, the service has been spotty
Right.
around the building. It's especially spotty downstairs in the police department. They frankly use it more often than we do up here in terms of taking their laptops with the meetings and whatnot. We met with DTI probably about a year ago, and they did an analysis of the building, and sure enough, they found areas of no coverage downstairs in the police department. They also realized that the existing access points are probably about 10 years old.
Right.
And so it's probably time to update those. And so based on that, we went through, really kind of applied that to all the city facilities. Said, well, what do we need for all the city facilities? Which is probably came up to number 14. And then market, it's kind of asked DTI what's really kind of the optimal piece of equipment. And we got a quote for that, and that's where we came up with the price.
Okay. I guess just my concern is that if, I understand the need to move around and that we have shoddy service here and there, but if we're already experiencing those issues, I feel like this is not gonna resolve that. And I know that a company came in and said that this would help, but they run on the same 4G LTE wavelengths, and, sorry, I did this for like 10 years, and I don't know about that.
Well, it's all, they're not 4GL, they're all part of the network.
The network, like,
The city's network. So
Right.
you see that little doodad that's sticking out of the ceiling there?
yeah, so the city's network still runs off of like Verizon and Sprint's 4G LTE network. I mean, all of the equipment, it'll still use the same equipment that any other device uses wirelessly.
No, I don't think so. So, when we were doing the cabling, we had to put some additional cabling in for future access points, that being one of those.
Right.
So that will go back to the network closet upstairs, and from there it'll jump onto the internet. So that's really kind of the point. If I'm sitting with my laptop, I can reach that, and I can get back to the server to access my files
Wirelessly, right?
wirelessly from here to that point. And then if I want to go to the internet, I'm accessing the internet from the server upstairs in the closet. So I'm never hitting a cellular network. Now the police officers and those who are out in the field do use a cellular network. Obviously, because they're out in the field, but this is separate from that. This is all just interior. This wouldn't really be any different than maybe what you have at your home.
Just internal interior, you're not even accessing.
No. Yeah, this is all just interior to the city's network. But instead of like,
So a booster?
so instead of having my laptop plugged into the outlet in the wall, I can take it with me to a meeting and I can access the WAP and be able to get onto the network and access my files.
Okay. All right, I'm good with that.
Well, I don't think your face
I
says
just-
you're good with that, so.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and
Is
There's
there,
just new Wi-Fi hotspot, like Wi-Fi access.
Yeah.
but I guess, I just really felt like if we had issues, dead spots and issues like them connecting wirelessly before, how is this any different? It's still you still can't penetrate the concrete walls, and you're still gonna have issues in the summer.
But aren't there being some more added?
But it's hardwired, he said.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the wireless.
Yeah, but it's not wireless to the cell.
Right.
If I'm sitting downstairs in the police department with my laptop, and I'm trying to access through a remote hotspot to cellular network, then yeah, I'm going to have difficulties with cement walls. But that's not what this is. This is accessing a hub that's going to be in the ceiling or down the hall. That'll be able to get back to the network.
It says in the request that there were some additional network drops added for additional access points, right?
Right.
yeah, I
I
mean,
think that's what
one of
these,
them right there.
replacing the existing ones and adding these new ones that they've already cabled when they build a networking cable we were last year.
All right.
So it's,
I was like, 14's a large number for something that I felt like wasn't gonna resolve the issue.
No. Yeah, I would.
so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's replacing some of the existing 10-year-old access points that are out there and adding some of the new ones that were already cabled in.
Correct.
That just aren't set up.
yes, so, yeah, like the drop is there in this.
So bottom line, will we be able to play Candy Crush Saga?
But other than internal, so it'll take care of our internal, I guess, connections. But if we're trying to project or do something like that, we'll still have that same struggle. It doesn't resolve that issue of if you want to get on the internet.
Well,
Connect to a website to project something or to do.
if you want to get on to, it kind of depends on what you're doing, how you're connecting. If you want to get onto the internet via that lab, back to the server, there shouldn't be an issue at all. It should be like that. But if you're accessing the internet through that mobile cellular device, which maybe some people are, I don't know. I mean, I'd be surprised if they're doing that. They may be doing that because they can't access a lab. So, in a little bit, it's that kind of when you walk into a room, you got to look for your connection. So it's kind of like at home. You know, I'm at home on my cell phone. I can access through the cellular network, or I can flip over to my Wi-Fi at home and access my Wi-Fi sitting upstairs, my spare bedroom that gets onto Google and takes me to the internet. So I'm not even hitting the cellular network, I'm not hitting the Sprint network that I have. So it's kind of the same concept. I'm not sure, maybe some users are trying to access a cellular instead of accessing a WAP. I don't know.
Just think we're getting into the weeds.
Debbie, do you have a question?
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Absolutely.
Quick
That's why
question.
we do, that's why we
Yeah.
go through this.
Or
Just
here.
on the budget breakdown where we had neighborhood services merged with community development, is there a way, because the budget went up double in cost on personnel, and it's because we merged over. But we have on the neighborhood services side, we have merged with community development. So if you look at why there's no budget, it would tell you at the top. This one should probably say something like includes merger from neighborhood services at the top, or an asterisk at the bottom.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
You're looking at
Just
community
putting it in both spots is the
Yeah.
wrong one.
It's just that that's,
I know, but if you just look, just if you're not
I
paying
know,
attention to that,
I did,
Like, why did it double?
it doubles.
I did the same thing, and I realized,
Thanks.
Well, it's not, it didn't double, well, tell me which page, tell me, you're looking at
she's
community
looking at-
development.
she's looking at
General
the
and
spreadsheet.
community development, if you look at actual 2018, 205, 211, proposed 2020, 405,600.
Yes,
That's almost double.
yes. Because this includes, but it's not necessarily the result of the merger. It's a shift in the position. So
Okay.
that 2020 budget includes the building official that we added this last year and a new planner. So there are different positions that have existed in the community development budget in the
Well,
past.
it-
So
and
it's a
since
combination.
Since
And
it's
we-
not explained, if you can explain that, if somebody asks, I would just ask that either have it annotated or, because that one sticks out, I think.
Okay.
Why can't we just get rid of the old?
Yeah, we'll take it out of the final budget.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
We should
Anything
probably,
else?
on this other page where, is all the information, we can add, these positions
An
can add.
asterisk at the bottom that says explanation of,
Anything else on the technology section for Coral?
For the equipment,
Or, sorry,
but that's okay,
technology,
equipment and
yes.
technology kind of merge. Okay, then next we move into supplemental requests, and when we first looked at the list of supplemental items, it was longer than what ended up landing in the recommended budget. So the items that, so we looked at those technology and equipment items as kind of critical to the ongoing operations. The things that we then look at are truly what we consider to be supplemental. So those things provide new positions, new programs, new equipment to really enhance existing services or provide new services. With the exception of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory update, which has been included, all of the supplemental requests have ongoing budgetary impacts, and that's certainly something that we want to consider each year as we look at that. Are these one-time expenditures? Are they ongoing expenditures? I think We did recommend several of those items with ongoing budgetary impacts, but certainly something with the limited growth that we have each year in our revenues, we have to be really cognizant of that and careful and thoughtful in our evaluation and recommendations. Occasionally, a supplemental request will also have an increase in revenue or new revenue stream associated with it. None of the supplemental requests that are included in the 2020 budget at this point provide obvious opportunities for revenue generation. In addition to the requests that are detailed in the attachments, we also discussed a variety of other staffing needs and considerations, particularly in the police department. And that I think is going to be an ongoing conversation. We'll have some of that as we talk about the recommendation for directed patrol. I think in all areas we're continuing, we spent some time through this budget process, and it's work that will continue in really focusing attention on data and statistics and developing. In many cases, there are things that we haven't been tracking that we need to be tracking going forward. And so a lot of energy and attention has been and will continue to be focused on that, because both as we develop those recommendations to bring to you, and then as you evaluate our recommendations, we believe it's important to have that information to guide our future budget decisions. So included in the supplemental requests, there are a total of $368, in terms of the 2020 dollars, $368,000 that are included in the budget that has been recommended to you this evening. Those include, in the legislative budget, an increase in the budget for tree maintenance on public property, including right-of-way, and specifically that section of KDOT right-of-way along Shawnee Mission Parkway. We added about $20,000 to that line item in legislative to address that. We felt like, at least in the first year, that would be sufficient to kind of help us put some additional parameters around the program and look at the maintenance of trees on public property and right-of-way. We also included an additional $15,000 in the legislative budget for council constituent communications. During our last work session, we kind of talked about potential letters that were coming from wards and maybe some other options and ways to communicate. And so rather than be very specific and pin that down right now, we wanted to go ahead and incorporate some additional funds in the budget so that the council can continue to have those conversations about what is the best way to communicate or improve your communication with your constituents. And I don't know that it has to be the same for every ward. So we did include that funding in the legislative budget. And then we did include $15,000 to look at an update of our greenhouse gas inventory. The city completed an inventory with Black and Beach back in 2008 that resulted in the Climate Action Plan that was adopted in 2009. That plan set a goal of a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2020. And guess what's here next year? 2020. We haven't really tracked the progress during that time, and this has been an issue that the Sustainability Commission and the governing body has kind of talked about. Should we take a look at that, and should we update that in looking at how we inform future council decisions?
Are we going to get a copy of that, whatever was done in 2009?
I think it's out on the website.
Oh, is it?
We can certainly send a link. We'll just send the link to everybody.
Yeah, it's out there, but I forget.
I think you
So
have
the
to.
Sustainability Commission plan and the links in the document center, or you
Yeah,
can search for
but
it as well.
We'll send you a link to the climate action plan.
All right, well, thank you.
In the Community Development Department, as we just touched on, there's a recommendation to reestablish the city planner's position. This is, in the past, this has been elevated and had almost a quasi-department director level of responsibility. The recommendation here is to create an entry-level planner's position that is responsible for the general day-to-day zoning administration, preparation of the staff reports for land use applications, and just kind of again, that day-to-day zoning administration. It varies over time and it varies from day to day depending on the activity. But we do feel like, similar to the request when we wanted to bring the building official's position in-house and not do that contractually, that we do feel like there is enough consistent development activity in the community to support this. And, you know, right now you've got your assistant city administrator, finance director, you know, doing all of the zoning background research and preparing all of the staff reports and
Form-based code.
Becoming quite a bit.
this is also, you know, this is also a position that we would anticipate could sort of undertake some additional research on a lot of the zoning issues. You know, we'll do a lot of that as a part of a comprehensive plan update, but there will be things ongoing as we look at that. So they might look at things like tear downs and rebuilds, green building codes, which I know is something else we touched on, accessory dwelling units, and other things that might be of sort of ongoing relevance or interest to the council.
I have one related question on that. If we wanted to build in those sort of green credentials as part of the position, should that be part of the position or just left to the discretion of staff and the hiring committee? And what's the best
Certainly
way to
something
do
we could look at if we want to build it in. I know our building official is currently LEED certified, but it may not be. I mean, it may be something that we want to put on a preferred list for the planner, and that we manage or make sure that in some capacity as an organization we have that. Right, I think I saw that on his card.
Yeah.
Right?
He's LEED certified. That'd be my recommendation, is to put it as a preferred item in the job solicitation. If you get somebody who doesn't have those, we can certainly provide the training and opportunities to get those certifications over time.
In the Parks and Recreation Department, as you know, most of their capital facility requests are handled through the CIP and the Parks and Recreation sales tax, but the general fund impact here is just an upgrade, an increase in funding of about $20,000. I think that's probably high to be able to extend some of the hours for some of our entry desk and facility positions so we ensure better consistency and customer service and the people who are able. Right now we're artificially breaking up shifts and reassigning people to keep them under a 1,000-hour threshold. That doesn't make sense when you think about the positive phase that we want to deliver to the patrons coming into the community center. So this would allow us to accomplish that. And then in the police department, we have a recommendation for a directed patrol unit. And with that, I'm going to take a break. I think I'll touch on the recommendation briefly, and then I will let Captain Madden and the chief kind of elaborate and provide some additional information on what directed patrol is and what we would hope to accomplish. But the recommendation is, as you will recall, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were experiencing kind of an outward migration of patrol officers, particularly those with 5 to 10 years of experience, because the larger agencies had updated. They were having trouble filling positions, and so we were losing people to Johnson County, Lenexa, Olathe, other places. Part of that we address through our classification compensation study, and again, that's part of why we need to continue to look at that. But at one point, I think we were down 8 patrol officers, which is certainly a position that we don't want to be in. That's about a third of our actual on-the-street patrol force. So the department did a number of things, including looking at some different recruitment opportunities, places where they recruited, both digitally and electronically and in person, and you know, really had some tremendous success in filling those positions. In many instances, we sent, what did we send? 5 through the academy. We had 4 in the academy at one time, which was the largest number for us at any point. But as a part of that, because we were sending a large number of those folks through the academy, which meant that they effectively, once they got through the academy graduation and then through their field training programs, It takes about 8.5 to 9 months to actually get them to the point where they're on the street and functioning independently. So we also asked at the time for consideration to overhire in the department. We've had 29 sworn or commissioned positions probably for the last 20 plus years. And so we looked at overhiring to allow us to make sure that we weren't ending up with big gaps. We are currently, and have been for the better part of the last year, overhired at 31. And I think it's served us well for a variety of reasons. Part of that, we didn't actually have 31 officers on the street because we still had an officer who was deployed to Afghanistan and a variety of other things. So there were, although we had 31 hired, we didn't always have 31 here and on the street. That still is the case and is always going to be the case when we consider things like workers' compensation injuries, or we still face shorter-term deployments that create some of those vacancies. So as we started thinking about needs, both in terms of patrol, investigations, potential impacts of new developments in the community, and looking at the service delivery from the police department's perspective, the recommendation at this point would be to convert the 2 positions that we have authorized as overhires to permanent full-time positions, and allow the department to create a directed patrol unit or establish a directed patrol unit. So with that, I'm going to ask Captain Madden to step in and share some more information, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Now we'll try to get through this quick. I know it's been a long one, so try to answer a lot of your questions, but certainly hopefully be able to answer any others you have. Just kind of a quick disclaimer. I can't speak about ongoing issues or give you any real meats and potatoes about things that we're experiencing that are ongoing, but I'll try to give you as much as I can. So a directed patrol unit is essentially a unit assigned to target areas that we're experiencing high volume calls, problems, whether that be residential, business, or whatever the case may be. They can work on drug investigations. Recently, the metropolitan area, and we are not immune, have experienced an increase in drug-related robberies. And those usually involve weapons and obviously drugs. The threats of violence against the government, as well as schools that we experience as well. And also work on things like violent felony apprehensions. So when you think of, and another thing that's important is crime sprees. Crime is not local anymore. It's regional and national for the most part. So you have these groups of people that travel from one place to another committing crimes. And unless you can stay on top of that through intelligence gathering and information sharing, it's hard to catch them. So you hear about like the felony lane gang on the news a lot. People that come into town, break into cars, steal wallets from restaurants and things like that, steal your identity and use that. So those are national organizations. So they would use that intelligence and information, opportunities to collaborate with other agencies without the burden of being tasked with responding to calls or a caseload for a detective. And that's primarily why you need dedicated people to do this. Patrol officers, obviously they work a district. They're out in the car, in a marked car and in a uniform. They have to respond to their calls. They can't dedicate time to a specific event most of the time. And detectives is the same thing. Detectives' average caseload is now we've got somewhere between 8 and 20 active cases per detective at any one time. So they don't have the opportunity to really get into the community and find out what the problems are that you would rely on a directed patrol unit for.
How many detectives do we currently have in?
Well, there's 4 in the investigations division. So you got myself, and you got Sergeant Palmieri, Detective Smith, and Detective Shears. So there are several different things that would be necessary and would benefit the city as a whole by doing this. Some of the things that they would need to be trained and be well versed in would be surveillance techniques, drug investigations, informant management, electronic surveillance, interview interrogation, search warrants. And the thing that would be pretty exciting about this would be getting into the world of cell phone forensics. Currently, we have our capabilities are to rely on outside agencies for that. And that's fine in the instance of search warrants and things, and when you have a search warrant to take an actual device. But a lot of information is gleaned from consent searches. And if you ask somebody for a consent search to search their phone, and then you say, oh, by the way, you might not get it back for 6 months, you kind of lose a little of your leverage there. So, you know, obviously the big question is, does mission need this? And just to give you an idea, we receive information obviously from a wide variety of sources about things that are happening in the city. And since we started talking about the possibility of this unit, I've kept track of items that have come across that would be assigned to a directed patrol unit. And I think by having the unit, it would also allow, I think those numbers would increase as people see that we have the capabilities. So far this year, 15 incidents have been reported to us. 2 have come in through the TIPS hotline, 3 through police reports, 6 have come from outside agencies calling us. Mostly their drug and direct patrol units calling us and saying, hey, just so you know, this is going on. And then 4 citizen reports of complaints. So of those, 2 of those are related to spree crime. Both of those are burglary related. One is threats against government and weapons. One is threats of violence that involves hate type of activity. 2 are violent felonies, and 9 drug sales and drug activity. Let's see. So right now, essentially, we have, you know, patrol and investigations. We are pretty much 100% reactive. We're kind of missing that proactive piece that's out in the community, talking to businesses, the apartment management, trying to hear and see what's happening in the community that we need to work on. So having that unit adds that layer, that kind of third piece to help protect our community. And you know, I think once this unit gets started, you're going to see an increase in the number of crimes because they're going to be identifying more crimes. But I think in overall, you're going to start to see a reduction in crimes because it's essentially social engineering for criminals. So once you get it out there that you have these capabilities, that you're making a difference in the community, criminals are either going to move, they're going to go to jail, or they're going to stop being criminals. So win-win either way. One kind of anecdotal example of that is multiple years ago, we had officers that worked at one of the apartment complexes off duty. A lot of money was spent by them to install security cameras. There was a tremendous amount of crime that happened at this complex. And when the officers worked off duty, we caught almost everybody. And I still think to this day we benefit from that, because crime at that complex is still deep. Now, you know, it's starting to kind of trend back up, but it was virtually non-existent for multiple years because we sent that message that, hey, if you go here, you're going to get caught. And that criminals don't usually like to get caught. And just as another example of things that happen, there are a lot of things that happen that, like I said, we can't talk about, that we know. One thing that is kind of in the public now, but not necessarily this part of it, but recently a person was indicted in New York for, I think the actual indictment was for lying about weapons to a federal agency. But the overall investigation involved white supremacists and possibility of planning terrorist attacks. That person lived here his whole life, moved to New York 2 months prior to his arrest. So those are the things that we need to know about and have that intelligence capability to work on. And having the dedicated people to do that kind of thing would be beneficial.
So Dan, did you just answer your question? Does Mission need this?
You know, I think it could be very beneficial. I think that, you know, once they get the right training, start making those contacts, building trust between other agencies, because a lot of these kind of specialized units, they try to keep together. They don't like to let people in without trust. And actually, another recent example of that is a larger department called a neighboring department of ours that has a unit like this to tell them about something that happened that's happening in Mission. So if you know, if our group builds that confidence and trust, they're gonna call us
Directly, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, other cities, you allude to that, other cities have these units, and what is the component of their total staffing that's dedicated to that in terms of percentage?
I don't have it's pretty relative. Some have, you know, some agencies have drug units and directed patrol units. And some agencies just have directed patrol units, some agencies just have drug units. It's all dependent on kind of where they need to be. And for us, you know, the majority of our problems are concentrated on spree crimes and specific crimes. So I think a directed patrol unit for us, you know, you don't want to do it, you don't want to have one person out there by themselves. Just due to the nature of the types of things that you're going to be doing. But I think that would be sufficient to handle the types of crimes.
But in terms of other cities, how many other cities have units like this?
So Prairie Village, Lenexa, Sheriff's Office, Overland Park, Merriam's kind of cycles through, and I don't understand completely, but there's kind of cycles through. Sometimes they have it, and sometimes they don't. And Prairie Village has both a drug unit and a directed patrol unit. So I think everything's dependent on where your resources are at and how you can allocate them to best serve. And like I said, the proactive piece is kind of what we are missing here.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple questions here. These people, I'm assuming, would be assigned from within who we've already got. Are they going to be uniformed people? Are they going to be plain clothes?
They would have the flexibility. You know, there may be situations where one of them is in uniform and one of them is in plain clothes. That way, if they're monitoring a situation and they can, you know, the plainclothes officer may be monitoring and then the uniformed officer may be in a patrol car to make a stop. So there would be a lot of flexibility with how they would accomplish their tasks.
And they're basically investigators?
Well, it's kind of a hybrid. So it's kind of a hybrid between a patrol officer and a detective. But you don't have the burdens of having that radio, worrying about that radio come, you know.
Get called to
Yeah, while you're right in the middle of trying to watch
Right.
something. And so they're going to have the skills of a detective as far as the investigative component and you know, the specialized training for interviews and interrogations and things like that. But they're also going to have the skills of the patrol officer that can still function and perform the duties that they need to do to reach that goal.
So then we had the 31 assigned or allotted or whatever, even though we only had
The 2 overhires was 29 with plus 2
Right.
overhires, yeah.
so we had 2 overhires. Now we won't have 2 overhires. Will we need 2 overhires to be, well, you'd have these 2 go to the,
You're basically making those 2 over.
You're reallocating.
You're
right, so
reallocating.
then do we need 2 more overhires, is what I'm saying? Because these 2 guys are doing something totally different than what these overhires were helping do before.
So is that the way to increase the budget?
I'm just asking.
Very good.
Oh, now they have some water.
Well, I think, yeah, I had a couple other questions, but, I mean,
Let's go ahead and get through those and then we'll
Okay.
come back to.
yeah, so my first question was about, and obviously I think, you know, we want to keep all people we have and good people we have. My first question was the feasibility of this budget. You know, you were referring to a lot of additional training, and I don't see any of that in the budget request, so would that be absorbed somewhere else in the department budget? And then my second question was kind of for staff more generally, if we've looked at, you know, some of these problems sound like intelligence collecting. I get that that's going to be uniquely a law enforcement capability perhaps, but, you know, the problems with what sound like slumlord apartment type conditions, it may not be that a police response and an increased police presence is the best solution to those problems. So I was just wondering if there'd been a larger staff discussion about whether, you know, this was the best option to address the problems we're seeing versus, you know, I don't know what it is, increased code enforcement, you know, inspections, et cetera. So those were my 2 questions.
So we talk with codes. If there's codes violations, we would prefer that they handle that. And we work on several projects with codes. When we run in, and again, we have to be, we call it vanilla, because it's an open meeting and it's being recorded and put out to everybody. When we go to a certain apartment area and we find somebody that's kneeling down behind the cars with burglary tools, you just hadn't burglarized any cars yet, right? So we caught them just a little bit too early. We bump into that frequently. There are houses in this city that we get information on that we can't go sit, watch, do surveillance on because we have road patrol cars that are out. The evening shift the other night ran 36 calls for 4 people. So I can't expect them to go and sit at this house and watch how much traffic is coming in and out of the house. We stop cars every single day, and we smell burnt marijuana in the car. They admit that smoking marijuana, they consent to search. Sometimes we find marijuana, sometimes we don't, and then they're on down the road. The accident that I referenced the other night to you, that's an unforeseeable accident that happened. We had a stabbing recently, drug-related. We had another shooting, drug-related, that happened earlier this year. That's stuff that we generally don't see in this city. We also find on Facebook that there's people that are threatening to mow people down by the hundreds that live in this city, and we reach out to the federal government because we don't have people assigned. We can't assign a district car to go sit and watch a house for 8 hours because they're supposed to drive your streets and answer calls for service. A third of the calls that we get in crime that we get in this city is auto calls. I have on my phone from the neighborhood, thank God it wasn't my neighborhood, on Ring that somebody put out, that there was a guy in a ski mask that was going door to door and went, and it took him less than 5 seconds to pull the door handle on that car and figure out that that wasn't the right car and he went to the next house. So that stuff happens out by my house, and I'm the chief. So we can allocate these officers to, we have vehicles that we've seized that we can use for undercover things. We can go and park it down at any business in this city and put some stuff inside of it and wait and see if somebody breaks into it. I'd rather break into that than break into your cars or somebody else who lives here, or try and steal that car. They're able to do those kind of operations. We are very reactive in what we do, and this is an opportunity to be proactive. The staffing that you asked about, yeah, we're at 31 officers right now. We, to my knowledge, are the only department in the metro that is fully staffed, including their overhires. And believe it or not, I have the names of 3 people that are certified from other law enforcement agencies that want to come work here.
Cool.
It's really good.
Yeah, that's great.
When another city, and I'll say it, Lenexa is down 14 people and trying to recruit my people. So we have a very good department. We appreciate what you guys do for us. As Laura said, we would like to get that number to go to 31 and take, not the 2 newest officers, but we want to take 2 officers and allocate them to this program to be proactive. I will tell you that one of the agencies that Dan listed earlier stopped doing their directed patrol to stick people back in patrol to keep their staffing up. It took them over 2 years to get that program back up and running. And all those cases are just gone. They're just cold. They're done. So there's other positions that we've asked for. Laura and I have talked about it, but we agree that this is probably the best route to go. We can always come back at a later time if we find we need more officers on the street or whatever. Let's wait and see what the developments look like. We don't want to overhire and hire too many people. But I think by allocating these other 2 people to directive patrol is a step in the right direction. Let's be proactive in what we're doing.
And what about the costs associated with that and the training and the additional?
We have a training budget
Okay,
for
so
that.
come out of that.
Yeah, and that's where it would come from.
And
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. A lot of the training, when you talk about specialized areas like this, there are training programs available from the federal government that are free of charge. And even programs, you know, when you talk about the cell phone forensics, if you just jumped into that, it's fairly expensive. But for example, the Secret Service has a program that allows us to, you know, as long as we agree, if some other agency needed us to analyze a phone, that we could do that, and they provide us the equipment and the training for free.
And I think that question about the larger impacts, yes, we've initiated some of those discussions, because I think that's really important.
About whether policing is the best solution or some other.
Well, or some combination, and I think it's some combination. I think part of that is, several years ago, we actually tried something, and we didn't have a lot of success, but what we recognize is on a variety of fronts, particularly those people that live in the apartment complexes are sort of often forgotten or unreached portion of our population, and for us, they make up a significant number of those folks, right? So we've talked about, working with property managers. We actually, I think, put together, I think Dan, you wanted, we kind of did some circuits with the complexes and the property managers, and we had a team of the police department and code enforcement, and actually Parks and Recreation, because, can we draw folks in, can we advertise those programs? We didn't get a lot of great response, but I think there's some opportunities to come back and try some of those things as well. And part of that is, as we've talked about, I think if you can have some of this dedication through a directed patrol unit to help develop and categorize those issues and pass those on. So there may be some things, again, that aren't law enforcement related that they may see as a result of doing that. And I think both things. I think we work with code enforcement and potentially, we haven't done a lot of this in public works, but now that Brent has all of his staff, positions filled, one of the things that's really trending in a lot of the conferences that we go to, and I imagine probably the things that Brent is seeing as well, is that your public works staff is another set of eyes in the field.
Sure.
And so, really thinking about how do we train all of our staff that are out in the field to be tuned into. We obviously don't want to put people who aren't trained in dangerous situations,
No.
but
Observe and
seeing,
report.
observing and reporting, we think we can make a lot of good connections through this. And then with the directed patrol, you have the ability to follow up as that information kind of comes in.
That makes sense. I was just concerned about, mirroring what are we doing to help prevent people being the person who's trying to steal the car for whatever other reasons are going on in their life, or checking on their housing conditions and things like that. So
Well, whether it's a code
bigger
enforcement officer or a law
conversation.
enforcement officer, I mean, I think the more eyes that we can put on potential problem areas, it sends a message. Somebody is paying attention, and oftentimes when somebody is paying attention, as Dan mentioned, the activity that you don't want to see goes away. If somebody's watching, you're going to be less likely to, be involved.
What percentage of the weapons that you, most of the guns, that you confiscate are registered?
It just depends. Some of the serial numbers are filed off, and the gun laws have changed. So, but again, it's some of the people that we come across. You obviously can't be a felon with a gun. You have to be a certain age to carry a gun. That was part of what one of the shootings was up in the apartment complex. Was the age of the kid. And next thing you know, the ball bat comes out and hits the guy in the head. That stuff we generally don't see. But we have this year. And then the school incident. I'll spare you the pictures of the stabbing over the weekend. Drug related. And I'm not saying this unit does everything about drugs. It's property, it's education. And one of the things you guys talked about the apartment complexes, that's one of the goals that was set downstairs is the head maintenance person and the manager of each one of the apartment complexes. We did it a few years ago. We brought them in and we enticed them for lunch with pizza from Avaludo's. Brought them in and we had some good conversations. Codes enforcement was there. It's a good way for them and us to all coordinate. And we have officers that part of their assignment is go into specific apartment complexes. Jay Flair does a lot of that stuff. And there's not an apartment manager in the city that does not know Jay Flair. So.
Yeah, I had a question a little bit more logistical, and I don't want to get into the weeds, but if you're, say a drug crime is committed at a particular apartment complex, I'm just wondering how, does it rabbit hole really easily where you could end up getting involved in another jurisdiction involving drug-related activity when really there's a hub of a variety of activity happening at that particular apartment complex? And so I guess I'm just wondering how do you scale the priorities of where an investigation can go?
So if you got drugs and we go up and we talk to you and we get some information and you get arrested, don't get arrested, and then we're talking about performance. If it's something that goes to another jurisdiction because drug people just they're all over the place. There's a task force through Johnson County that has somebody from Shawnee on it, and they go from different counties all the way up to Atchison, Wyandotte County, Miami County, Franklin, and all those departments are involved. That was brought up by Sheriff Hayden several months ago, and one of my concerns is he's elected, we're all appointed, and most of the people that are on those kind of task force, generally not in the city that you're here to represent, and I would rather our people be here. If there's something that goes to Prairie Village or Lenexa, these DPU units that we have will coordinate with them and see where that goes. Our time needs to be spent here. Now, if part of our investigation leads over there and we do something together, great. But most of our time needs to be spent here in Michigan with our residents. And
Is there anything we can do to compel some of these apartment complexes to hire their own security staff, or do you find that to be kind of inefficient? Or?
Most of them have security of some form or the other. Most of it isn't like a presence all the time. It's more of a drive-through, check, lock pools, lock things up, and do some lot checks throughout the night, but it's not a presence all the time. But, you know, we do have a, you know, relationship with them as well, and as a matter of fact, we've hired several of our officers.
Well, I actually asked, as we've talked about this through the evaluation of the request, I asked, I think, exactly that same question. And one of the things that I hadn't thought of, which I think is interesting, because I said, why not shift that cost to the private sector, right? They have a business interest in keeping their complexes secure. Well, right now, their vacancy rates don't require them to have to take those additional steps. So they're able to fill, and if someone leaves, they can turn those apartments over. And so their desire to invest their own dollars to do that, they're still making money without having to invest those dollars. Yeah, and so there's no incentive from that. And so until the market changes again, so part of that I think is absolutely market driven, part of it's relationship building. And I honestly had just not, you know, really thought and evaluated that. And that, Dan?
That doesn't sound like it's going to lend itself to anything real positive, in my opinion.
Right.
You know, and the other thing is we talked a lot about, you know, the multifamily housing units, but a lot of the things that we're seeing aren't necessarily in those places either. I mean, we've had cell phone stores broken into multiple times. That's a regional/national thing that's occurring. And then you've got, you know, our shoplifting and just things like that are just, you know, kind of going through the roof this year with shoplifting. Now that there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. Usually it's related to the effectiveness of loss prevention officers, but you know, it's just something that always kind of, you know, we have several shoplifting incidents at the store. I'm not naming names, but
I know, because my mother-in-law told me that there was something that went down at the Wallstone.
But you know, and then you know, several days later, after you make an arrest there, people are calling saying, "Hey, this car's been parked in our parking lot for 6 days." Well, we go up there and it's a stolen car. So I mean, all these things kind of mesh together. So you are going to go down a lot of rabbit holes in some of these things because there are so many crimes that are intertwined with auto theft, forgeries, drugs, shoplifting. I mean, they're all a lot of times kind of intertwined.
Ken, do you have another question?
I'm just wanting to get back on our budget focus if we can.
Well, this is part of it. Any other questions for the officers?
Can I just make one quick comment? I want to thank you so much for keeping us informed. That email that you send us when something happens is so helpful. So when I'm reading it in the paper the next day, it's great that you do that. I want to tell you how much I appreciate it.
No problem. I hope your mom saw me up at Wellstone, by the way. Because I was actually up there last Friday night. One of the important things, too, because we all care about the streets, and this is my last topic. So, we still have one person in field training, and another one that we had hired from Leewood just got out of field training and is making a pretty good impact. He's only been on his own for a couple of weeks, but he had experience at Leewood. So, if we take these, not the new officers, but we take these overhires, convert it to full-time, and take 2 of our more senior officers over to directive patrol, you're not going to really see anything on the street. The thing that you're going to see on the street is when people are out on workers' comp and gone on military leave. We have several people that are National Guard and reserves that have 3 to 6 week tours coming up over the summer. That's a pinch. When people get hurt, that's a pinch. But again, directive patrol is one of those things that you don't ever want to stop, because once you stop, all those cases go cold, and it's at least 2 years before it's back up and running. So we have to think and try and plan ahead on that stuff and not run 8 people short. So.
Hillary, one more question.
And it's not a question, just a comment along these lines. Just thank you guys for all the work you do. You guys do a really good job, and you came really prepared for today. But I think the questions are more in line with, you know, we spend 1/3 of our whole budget on public safety, and so even, you know, an increase of $200,000 is significant to that bottom line, and that's where I think a lot of the questions came from. But thank you guys for all the work that you do.
Always glad to answer questions. Never a problem. Thank you.
Well, and I will say, again, going back to, you know, I have to commend the chief and his staff, and I have pushed them. I've probably not been the most popular person over the last couple of months because I keep saying, show me the numbers, right? And, you know, they've reached out to the Synergy developments in other states and are really initiating conversations about what types of public safety calls are you seeing, and starting to build that and building that into numbers and evaluating, you know, at this point, what the information that we've at least collected to this point wouldn't suggest. We've had greater swings and fluctuation in annual call load without the addition of something like that. But we certainly need to stay ahead of that, and I think that the experience from a couple of years ago taught us some really valuable lessons about not getting behind, because I don't want to be in a position feeling like we had to catch up, kind of where I felt like we were a couple of years ago. So building the data, building the statistics, building the numbers, evaluating those is going to be part of that ongoing process, so that if we need to come back to you and be able to say, we're seeing these trends, we feel like we need these additional resources, we can really have that kind of comprehensive conversation. So I think that's going to benefit us all going forward. That's the end of the general fund supplemental request. There were a couple of other miscellaneous things that, while they weren't included in the budget at this time, I think we've talked about wanting to continue to research and evaluate in the coming months paid leave time, family leave time for full-time staff, potential additional staff support for public information, constituent communications, PR. We talked at the last work session about needing to kind of build or explore what we meant by that, so we could really put together a comprehensive request, and then looking at staff support and reserve funds for sustainability projects and other things. So we'll continue to talk about those. They are included in this bottom line budget, but then if you move into this next section and say what we also did was left additional excess general fund balance. So there's about $1.1 million in excess fund balance. So we have opportunities, whether that's on the solid waste front or any of these other fronts, to come back and consider some of these other things. Yes.
Please tell me if I missed it, but during our work session, something that I presented as a supplemental request was the banners or flags for Johnson Drive, and I just didn't see it.
It's in
here.
$7,000 for 2 sets of banners.
Where it is?
In the MCBB budget.
Okay.
So it's there. Hold that thought, and we'll have it.
Okay.
So then, I'm going to let you tell me, we've talked a lot about the capital improvement program. There's no changes to the capital improvement program. Are we comfortable with the recommendations? And the CIP committee met this past Monday and gave a thumbs up recommendation. So you now have the recommendation of the CIP committee on that. So, okay, so then the few other funds that we talk about, the special alcohol fund, again here, we historically contribute the majority of those funds, and we've recommended $50,000 for 2022 to the Drug and Alcoholism Council of Johnson County. About $15,000 of that allocated to offset expenditures associated with our DARE program, and then another $30,000 for costs associated with the mental health co-responder program. We're seeing an increase in revenues in special alcohol funds, so we're able to be able to cover. Yes. Solid Waste Utility Fund, this is the fund where we account for the fees that we collect from all of our single-family property owners to help pay and support the annual trash recycling and yard waste contract. As you know, the current contract with Waste Management expires December of 2019. We very shortly will be putting the RFP for new solid waste management services out on the street. Unfortunately, we can't do it this far in advance because nobody will hold their prices, you know, that long. So we're going to have to certify our budget and rates before we know what those new rates will be. So we left kind of the $85,000 transfer as a placeholder in the budget, but we'll have a lot of things to review and evaluate in coming months when we get those responses back. I think, again, that general fund balance provides some flexibility. So I think there are two options. We could consider certifying the rates as they are currently, which is about $175 annually for each single-family property. That's about 86% of the current total solid waste bill. Or we could look at certifying 100% of that, But I think from our perspective, we would recommend let's certify at the same level and then really have a more comprehensive conversation about what that's going to look like. And as a part of that, you know, we talked at the last work session about curbside leaf pickup, and I think that's the appropriate time to really look at how we might want to consider using that in connection with the new solid waste contract.
So when would we be having these discussions?
You're probably going to be looking at it in September, October, so that we have plenty of time to make that decision and then communicate publicly in the event that we have a change in vendors. The
Is that a calendar year contract?
Yes.
Right.
Yep. NCBV fund, that's where we do a variety of things. We capture the 9% transient guest tax, which right now is currently only being generated by Wood Spring Suites. When the Gateway Hotel opens, there'll be additional revenues that come into that. But transient guest tax revenues have been very healthy. They're used, first and foremost, have been used to support the publication of the Mission Magazine. They've exceeded, and we used to supplement that with a $20,000 transfer from the general fund. We haven't had to do that for the last 2 or 3 years. And because those revenues were in great shape there. We also use that NCPB fund as kind of the pass-through for our holiday adoption program and the Mission Business Partnership. But those are revenues in equal revenues out. So those are absolutely revenue neutral situations. So we have recommended in the 2020 budget $10,000 from the NCPB fund for the purchase of banners, 2 different styles, to be installed on the entire length of Johnson Drive. And then really just the Mission Crossing TIF and CID fund and the Cornerstone Commons CID fund were legally required to budget separate funds for those. And again, that is money that comes in very specifically and goes out very specifically in accordance with the terms of the development agreement. So that is the 2020 recommended budget. So our plan would be to take this and kind of turn it into a flashier presentation for the community dialogue, and we hope that, oh, Mr. Arnett even left, but Mr. Arnett, he didn't stick it out with us tonight. I think he was our only attendee at last year's community dialogue. So we're hoping, we'll at least tell him to invite 5 friends, like our market theme this year, right? But our plan would be to have that community dialogue at the beginning of the council meeting next week, and that gives the public the opportunity to comment, and then anything we want to revise, we would do so before our legal public hearing, which would be at the August Finance and Admin Committee meeting with your final consideration of the budget. I believe it's August 21st is the date of that. Questions, comments, changes, suggestions?
No, I think you did a great job.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, all the staff. Yes.
That's always a team effort, so thank you.
I was commenting, it takes so long for us to read it, I can't imagine how long it takes to write it.
Just to type it
Well,
up.
there's a funny
Some
story.
weekends in there.
Yeah.
Laura, did you have any other department updates?
I
for
don't
us?
think I do. Thank you.
All right. Well, that concludes our finance administration meeting.
Thank you very much.
Already?
Already?
It's not even midnight.